live, but oh,
So who do you want in the meeting?
I got a video settings. I don't want video. How do I do
We don't
this?
want to mirror your video.
No, I took that off.
Advanced video setting. Oh,
Where?
when you go back to the original multi-frames,
Yeah.
you go down to here on your, just select that one.
Won't let me do no media. Media.
You go record and I'll sit here and I'll talk with it till I get.
Okay.
no
Oh,
video.
layout. Hold on. I want side by side. No,
No, you do want to pin one of them, right?
I can't. You can't do that.
Once you get multi-images.
Yeah.
All the time.
Grid.
You got it.
Maybe that only does 6. Daryl said there might be a stack.
Oh, go back to where you were.
Oh, yeah.
What's that full screen view?
Oh, okay.
Got it.
But
Because you want the host, right? Is that what you want?
yeah, but I also don't want me.
Right.
Show my
So go to your gears again.
settings. I don't want.
Select video. You get that
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
nothing,
that's it.
change visual background. Can you throw that drop down?
Yeah, but that's just the background.
Okay.
So no.
That's what you do. We do all the time. We kill the.
Yes, but it's not letting me
Mhm.
show myself view near my video.
It's weird like that.
I don't know. Now, will this stay? What happens with that? Will this stay post view? Stop video. What's this?
Good afternoon, everybody. Do we have quorum? Jen, I'm just trying to see if we have all the members.
Yes, we do.
Perfect, thank you. All right, the time right now is 2:02. We'll call this meeting to order. Just before we get started, just a couple quick notes, housekeeping matters. Chair Toth, unfortunately, isn't feeling well, and so she won't be here today. So I'll be presiding over this meeting. As well, Mayor Holder will not be present at the meeting today. The meeting's expected to be posted to YouTube tomorrow. And just as a kind of just a housekeeping matter here, for anybody that doesn't have their mics muted, both participants in the meeting and observers, if you could just ensure that your mics are muted. And if you're a non-participant, could you also turn off your video feed? So if you could do that, that would be greatly appreciated. Other than that, just a quick, before we actually get started here, the board continues to assess the COVID-19 situation and public health recommendations before we return to in-person meetings. I know Chair Toth usually makes an announcement at the top of the meetings about, our potential return to in-person meetings. At this point, we're just continuing to monitor, and hopefully we'll have a decision on that front soon. With that, we can call this meeting to order, and I ask if there are any conflicts of interest that need to be declared by any of the members. If so, please do so now. Seeing none. Do any of the members have new business for today's meeting? Okay, seeing none. In your package, you have the minutes from the February 17th, 2022 Public London Police Services Board meeting. Assuming you've had an opportunity to review and consider same, are there any revisions or corrections or questions that flow from the minutes that are currently before you in your package? Seeing none, can I get a motion that the minutes of the meeting of February 17, 2022 Public London Police Services Board meeting be adopted as presented? I see Member Branscombe, and can I get a seconder? Councillor Cassidy. Is there any member that's opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Which moves us on to Deputy Chief McIntyre. You have your item, investigations conducted by the Special Investigations Unit. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So in front of you, I've included 2 SIU investigations and the results of those. And they are submitted in accordance with the Police Services Act for your review. So know that I say this every meeting, but I think it's important to note that all SIU investigations, whenever they come in to investigate police and specifically the criminal conduct of police officers, their website's an amazing resource to really spell out the details of all of those for you. So they are made public, but we'll speak to them briefly here for you just for your awareness. So the first one was an occurrence on August the 28th of 2021. It was a 911 call police received about a female being observed with a handgun. in an apartment after a fight. Officers are responding to that location, code 1, so that's lights and sirens. And they failed, in doing so, they failed to stop at a stop sign at Quebec Street in Queens, and they collided with a smaller passenger vehicle, a Ford Focus. 2 occupants were inside that vehicle, and both occupants were injured. That injury triggers SIU oversight. So London Police called the SIU. SIU came in to investigate. They pull apart that accident and what happened before and leading up to the accident, and they found that the failing to stop at that stop sign alone did not meet the threshold for criminal liability. They based that on a bunch of factors. One, the low speed. The officer was only traveling at 60 kilometers an hour. Their driving prior to the collision was very measured, and they can tell that from, of course, GPS data in our cars, etc. So the failing to stop, the SIU characterized in this case as a momentary lapse in attention. And because of that and resulting criminal case law, that does not hit the threshold for criminal liability. So when the SIU has completed their finding, our professional standards branch conducts a parallel review of that, looking at the London Police Service procedures, our services, and then of course the conduct of the subject officer named. So that review was completed, and they felt as though the finding in this case, what it was appropriately dealt with under the HTA. So that officer involved was charged under the Highway Traffic Act for failing to stop, which in this case was deemed to be the most appropriate legislation and the most appropriate process to follow with that set of facts. So that is the first one. I can move to the second, Chair, if you're good, and then take questions at the end or whatever your preference is.
Yeah, why don't we do that, Deputy Chief McIntyre? If you keep proceeding, we'll save the questions for the end.
Perfect, thank you. So the second incident occurred on September the 11th, 2021. Police were responding to a break and enter in progress. When they arrived, there was a disturbance involving the citizens involved, in that call, which resulted in the 2 individuals fighting being arrested. The complainant in this matter for who filed a complaint to London Police, which resulted in an SIU notification, was arrested for uttering threats, causing a disturbance, obstructing justice, which is interfering with the arrest of that other person involved. So the complainant in this case was transported to our headquarters detention unit for failing to identify herself and for, in short, aggressive behavior. On September 29th, so shortly thereafter, the complainant reported to the London Police that she had been sexually assaulted by the arresting officers during search incident arrest. So during her search following the arrest. As a result of that allegation, the LPS is duty bound to notify the SIU. The London Police stop any investigation into that complaint, and we wait for SIU to take care of it for transparency. On January the 27th of this year, the SIU determined that there were absolutely no grounds to proceed with a criminal charge. And in fact, were very blatantly stated that the evidence, numerous civilian eyewitnesses to that event, completely contradicted the complainant's statements and found that really her utterances and the allegation was demonstrably false. So it was a very clear finding from the SIU. And I just share that with you because that all of these, anytime SIU is involved, it endures incredible stress for our people. This, of course, took, again, 4 months for the SIU to clear. That's a heavy allegation. So that was a great finding from the SIU and supported our officers. All of our members involved, of course, they cooperated fully with the SIU investigation. There were no breaches of LPS procedure or policy found in this regard. That is the 2 SIU reports I have for you. My recommendation is that the board receive those reports, open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Members, do you have any questions flowing from Deputy Chief's report? I thought I saw Member Walker's hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am not asking a question, and I appreciate that from time to time there are women who may make a false allegation, but I think it's really important to reiterate that the police service is open to hearing reports from women who have been sexually assaulted, and that there is a committee in place to help look through the files to ensure that appropriate measures have been taken by police services, and that even if a woman were to come forward and disclose sexual assault, she can later withdraw that complaint. And so I think it's really important to let the public know that. And I know that you're mandated in many cases to lay these charges, but truly, if there's no complainant, then there's no complaint. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you for your comments, Member Walker. Do any other members have any questions or comments in relation to Deputy Chief McIntyre's reports? Okay, seeing none, could I get a motion that the board receives the special investigation reports as required by the Police Services Act? Okay, so I saw Member Bransco move it, and can I get a seconder, please? Member Walker, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. We move to the next item. It's Deputy Chief Betts with use of force statistics mandatory board report. Over to you, Deputy Chief Betts.
Chair, and through you to those in attendance today. This is a little bit of a longer report, but I think in some ways for some of our new members, it provides an opportunity to give you some additional information you may not have had previously. So as I conclude this report, I will invite you to have a look at Appendix B of the report if you haven't already done so. All 10 pages provide you with an exceptional view of what the calls are that our officers are attending, where force has been the result, and the interaction of that force, and that becomes critically important to the entire discussion. So on page 3 of the report that you have in front of you, you'll see the number of use of force reports that have been submitted in 2021, compared against the previous 4 years for a 5-year average, and also showing the number of calls for service. Although there's only an increase of about 1.5% in terms of calls for service, there is a 9% increase in use of force. And again, you will see why when you hit to Appendix B at the back end of the report. And I think it's important that given the number of firearms and indeed all weapons that our members are facing on a daily basis, that explains why you're seeing this increase in force. On page 4, there's an important chart representing the types of incidents that our officers are engaged in. It does look a little different than last year's report, and you'll see some blank spaces on that page, and that's in that chart. And that's because we wanted to get a little more granular and provide you with a little bit more information that we could tease out this past year during the course of the reviews to show you what the types of calls are that are really driving our officers' attendance and that result in increased presence or use of force. Also on page 4, under the weapons carried by subject, this is a category or a heading on the use of force report that the ministry provides for us to complete. And this one is really telling. And this is, again, I'm going to keep coming back to Appendix B. Though, as you will see here, we see an increase in the types of weapons or that the subject or the people that our officers are coming into contact with, an increase in virtually every area of that chart. That includes all firearm types, edged weapons, and things such as baseball bats and clubs. So a tremendous increase there. You'll also notice a year-over-year increase in the presence of firearms on the streets that our officers are encountering, and of course, an increase in edged weapons since 2019. As these numbers increase, the number of use of force reports submitted will also rise. During incidents where there's a presence of a weapon that could easily result in bodily harm or death, there's an understandably elevated response by our officers. That's in accordance with the Ontario Use of Force model, which is in Appendix A. So we provided you with a full and a blown up view of what that looks like and what each category or area is. It goes without saying, but I will say it anyway, that these are by far and away some of the most dangerous encounters our officers will face. So too is the danger to the people that are putting themselves in harm's way by arming themselves and confronting our officers. And although this is a report about force responses, I'd ask you to reflect on the force that our officers are facing on nearly a daily basis. When we think about unpredictable events that they take place in an officer's life, very few are more harrowing than an armed suspect. Few people are willingly walking into subjects or into situations where they know or suspect people are armed with weapons. And yet our officers are doing that almost at once every 1.8 days. And as I said, Appendix B provides you with an insight into what that looks like. On page 5, you'll see a chart called type of force used, and that is the indication of what our officers are having to use to deal with these particular situations. Now, I recognize here that there's an opportunity to speak about why the numbers don't add up to 299, which you got in your first chart, and that's because the officers are required to indicate, in many cases, if more than one form of force was used. So for example, if somebody tried to de-escalate a situation with their bare hands and it quickly escalated, or a knife or a gun was produced, they have to escalate to another use of force option. And that requires that they record both those types of force that they used. It's also reflective of the fact that in many cases, there's more than one officer who's dealing with a situation, and each officer who employs force is required to submit a use of force report, save and except with the exception of team reports for our public order unit and our emergency response unit. So that report explains why the force options are available, and they're available in Appendix A, as I mentioned. I would like to speak briefly about the conducted energy weapons that you see on that report, and that is intermediate weapon, and it says taser. So that's the brand name from Axon, the provider of the taser. It is a conducted energy weapon, and I should point out, and again, for the benefit of our newest members, CEWs can be used in one of 3 ways. A demonstrated force presence mode. That means that taser, if you will, is armed, and its integrated laser light is activated by pulling the trigger on that device. It's a yellow device. That's when you hear the sparking sound, that electrical sparking noise, right? So that is really a signal, an indicator to anybody who's in presence that if things don't change, something serious is about to happen, right? In most cases, the mere sound of that sparking or that electrical arcing is enough to bring the situation to a conclusion. However, not in all cases. The second mode of deployment is the probe deployment. And that's when the device fires 2 probes at the individual. And once they make contact, there is an electrical charge or discharge between the probes and the wires that are returning back to the device. That causes a momentary spasm, if you will, in the muscles between the probes. And that lasts as long as the device is cycling through for 5 seconds. And the best way to describe that for anybody who hasn't been tasered is it's like the worst muscle spasm or cramp of your life. But once the trigger is released, so too is the spasms. And then finally is the drive stun mode, and that's when neither the probes or the sparking is used, and the device is pushed against your skin, and the disruption of the muscle is between the 2 probes on the end of the device. We're required to report on all 3 modes of deployment in that. As I said, and personally having been pepper sprayed, having been subject to tear gas and tasered, the taser is by far the least impactful for a long period of time, although it does get your attention. So in terms of injuries, of the 299 reports in 2021, 51 resulted in some level of injury to the individual and 19 to our own officers because the person was continuing to fight. The majority of these injuries, 18, were as a result of K9 or medical personnel being used and utilized to remove those probes. Keep in mind that nobody gets close to a dog or a police dog without ample warning. So at this point, I'd like to turn your attention to the officer's perception of the people and the person's race. So as you'll remember, last year I reported that 2020 was the first year that we had to write to the ministry and provide them with officers' perception of the race of the individuals they're dealing with when force is employed. So this is our 2nd year. Consistent with the standards, 40 of the data standards in the Anti-Racism Act, the use of force report includes the following race categories as you have seen them on that report. Black, East, South Asian, Indigenous, Latino, Middle Eastern, South Asian, and white. Those are what's offered to our officers. We don't have the ability to enhance, change, or sort of contract those categories. That's what we've been provided with. And they are social descriptors here in Ontario. They're not based in science or biology, but differences that society's created, and they're socially constructed. For each report submitted, the reporting officer must include the perceived race of the subject that they're dealing with at the time the force was used. The overall number of subjects exceeds the number of force reports due to the fact that a use of force report may include several people. So think, for example, if we are stopping a motor vehicle and there are 4 people in that vehicle and force is used for whatever purpose, all 4 people are categorized in terms of the number of people for whom we're gathering that race data. A detailed listing of all the occurrences, as I've said, is in Appendix B, and you will see that the overwhelming number of cases that we did not seek out that interaction, but we were called there by a citizen looking for police help. So on page 7 is a breakdown of those particular categories for 2021 and 2020. They're virtually unchanged for the most part between the 2 years, but it's not necessarily enough for us to really have a trend over time. And quite frankly, it's a very, very small indication of all the interactions that London police officers have with members of the public. So from a trends perspective, the instances occurred where use of force was required increased by 25 from 2020 to 2021. The majority of this increase is attributed to a special project that was implemented in the spring of 2021 by the gun and gang section, and I believe you'll hear about that in the next board report. And as a direct result, we had many more team response and team reports filed by our emergency response unit, in fact, 18. This project primarily focused on the possession of illegal firearms within the city, and as I said, there's more on that in the following report. Subjects who have access to firearms and knives and other weapons continues to increase. Firearm possession resulting in the use of force was up by 9 incidents from 2020, and the subjects in possession of knives and edged weapons up 14. This is not the first year that we've provided that race-based data, as I've mentioned. And you'll also know from previous board reports that the CACP has endorsed and is looking to increase the instances in which we collect race-based data, so we have a more holistic picture to be able to provide you. And this is only the 2nd year. So the training unit members will continue to monitor incidents of reported force and emerging trends in London and around the country. They identify lessons learned, best practices, and that assists them in dealing and developing de-escalation training for our own officers. Education around de-escalation training continues to be incorporated into all of our training, as is the requirement to complete use of force reports when force is used. So as you'll recall, I asked you to have a look at Appendix B, starting at the end of the report, and where we've opened up our records to show you exactly the types of calls our officers are using and what's resulting in those use of force. It includes the occurrence type, how the occurrence was initiated, whether it was a warrant or in most cases, citizen generated, meaning a call for help. The number of people involved, including the perceived race, and most importantly, the presence of weapons that resulted in that. As I said, what's presented there is in reality what our officers are encountering on an average of 1.8 days every day. 1.8 days, that's what they're encountering. It's concerning. And we aren't perfect, but our officers are putting themselves in harm's way as guardians of public safety. And subject to any questions, that's my recommendation, and that the board receive this for their information.
Thank you for your report, Deputy Chief Betts. Members, do you have any questions for Deputy Chief in relation to the report he just provided? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you very much. And I think this particular report is a good example of how things have changed over time in terms of the reports that are provided. And I find the comprehensive nature of the report to be really helpful. You know, you can really see what was the call, what kind of force was used, a couple of comments, you know, the number of times that weapons are involved, the frequency that that's happening. I think it's remarkable that there's not more injuries, you know, either to officers or to the people who are being arrested or apprehended. It's just a lot of really dangerous situations resolved in a very effective way that's not resulting in a lot of injuries. Unfortunately, in this reporting period, there was a fatality and a couple of major injuries, and I do want to say, obviously, we want to avoid those occurrences from happening, but it's quite rare. And many years when we've had this report come in front of the board, there have been no fatalities and not very many serious injuries. But I do think, you know, Deputy Chief Betts pointed it out. I know the chief has made this point many times. The number of people who are carrying firearms, replica firearms, real firearms, is very alarming. And unfortunately, it's not a trend that seems to be receding. It seems to be ongoing. And I think we as a board, we need to be very focused on that. Very thankful. Personally, I'm very thankful for the officers who are responding to all these calls, managing to resolve them in such a effective way without resorting to really high levels of force. In many cases, you see the situation, you're like, wow, they have a serious weapon, and the force that's used is not very high, and it's resolved. And I think that speaks to the training and professionalism of the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer. Members, does anyone else have a question or comment in relation to Deputy Chief Betts's report? I have one as well. So maybe after you, Councillor Cassidy, or I'll go to the bottom of the list after you, Councillor Cassidy. I'll may volunteer some comments there, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question about the canine section of the report. It doesn't show up until 2021. Is this a change in how that's reported, or did we just not deploy canine units during those other years?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So this was referenced only briefly in 2020, and we've brought a little bit more to your attention again as part of that transparency and being a little more granular in terms of the information. And it's not too many people that are willing to stare down 100 pounds of bristling fur and teeth, but when the police tell you to show your hands or drop your weapon, there's limited options available.
So thank you. Thanks for that response. And again, just to reiterate what Councillor Helmer said, this is a really good report. It's very comprehensive. Collecting the race data is so important. And we can't go forward if we don't have the data. We can't identify problems, we can't make improvements, and then I think what this report really does is, as Councillor Helmer said, it's right in front of us, and anybody that cares to look to see the kind of things that our officers are up against, and to see again that de-escalation is so important, and the use of force is quite subdued compared to the threats that they are facing. This is a job that few are called to, and the ones who are called to this job are dedicated in their purpose and their mandate to serve and protect the public. And I, for one, am very grateful that we have this level of professionalism in our force. And this report just lays it all out there for everyone to see. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Any other members with a question or a comment in relation to the report? Councillor Helmer.
I wanted to ask about the times that force is used when the subject is an animal rather than a person, and whether there's any alternatives to police officers being the responders in that situation. So I'm not asking about a situation like, for example, you're entering somebody's residence and there's a dog that's being used as a weapon or something like that. Obviously, police are going to be the only ones capable of responding to that, but like a deer or something like that might have been injured in a collision, those kind of instances, which unfortunately are quite common. We regularly see those in the reports that we get, whether there's any alternatives like an animal control officer or conservation officer or somebody else who could be called on to handle that part. I can only imagine what it's like for the officers having to do that.
Thanks for that, through you, Chair. Good question on that. And as you're right, most of these, all of these are euthanization of animals that are in distress for one reason or another. For the most part, they are large animals or animals that have been hit by a vehicle and are suffering and are in sort of an immediate pain. There aren't always a lot of opportunities, and sadly, many of these happen after hours. And as we know, the police are the only 24/7, 365 service, and quite often we are left with as the ones to deal with these. But there is certainly an opportunity to explore other options with community partners if they're available to provide that assistance to us, and depending on their ability to respond. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Any further questions from members? Okay, seeing none, if I could just step down from the chair for just a moment. I think just because I happen to be looking at you, Councillor Cassidy, could you just assume the chair for just a minute while I ask this question?
Absolutely. I will take the chair and I'll turn to you, Mr. Chabar.
Thank you kindly. So Deputy Chief Betts, fully appreciating that I have not a fulsome appreciation of the operational concern, like the operational kind of components of this. Something that jumped out at me was when we use the term officer's perception of the subject's race or perceived race of subjects, the term perceived in and of itself suggests that it's very subjective, right? And so when we look at the classifications that are provided via the Solicitor General in the list or that category, we see Black, we see East, Southeast Asian, Indigenous, Latino, Middle Eastern, South Asian, and White. So I know, looking at it, even I would fall into one of these categories as a Middle Eastern, individual. That's how I would be classified there. But when I look at it, I also say, well, I have a lot of Latino friends or South American friends or Greeks or Portuguese or Italians that would look very, very similar in terms of characteristics. So I guess my question would be this: is there any direction, guidance, training, anything that's provided from the Solicitor General, maybe something that's found in legislation or maybe police training that would assist our service members in terms of, delineating or describing the race of the individuals that they are dealing with there?
Yeah. And Chair Cassidy, through you to Member Chabar. Great question. Thank you for asking. Couldn't have asked for a better question. And quite frankly, I'm going to take you to Appendix C in the report to start with. So there's where you're going to get a breakdown and a bit of a comparison. So the reason I'm taking you to that is because on the left-hand column is the National Household Survey. So that's what Statistics Canada classifies and produces in relation to racialized groups. The reason I'm pointing that out is because Ontario regulations, 58/16, so that's the street check regulation, tells us to use that particular racialized groupings for the purposes of an officer's perception of somebody that they're dealing with for the purposes of collecting, identifying information in certain circumstances. The Ontario Regulation 267, made under the Anti-Racism Act, which speaks to the collection of data, race-based data in relation to use of force under that Anti-Racism Act, provides us a slightly different list. Both are provincial regulations, but they are slightly different and point us in different directions. So we've mapped it out here. Now, the reason I'm setting that for you in that stage is because all officers in the province of Ontario, and including here, we all receive training in regard to that perception piece with street checks. So that is a crossover, and that's been the case since 2016. So the short answer is yes, the Solicitor General does provide us with some information. The nub of the matter, or the crux, as you've pointed out, is our perception. And the reason that provincially we've gone with perception is because really that's what drives the officer's response. And we may not know through a self-disclosure, for example, until we've arrested somebody, how they would self-identify. And so as we move forward with the collection of race-based data nationally, led by the CACP, and the consultation process that's underway for that, we are in fact trying to wrestle with this very problem of perception versus self-disclosure, or a combination thereof. And really that's what we're left with in many cases. It's how do I perceive somebody that I'm dealing with? And that's what ultimately has been determined, at least in Ontario, where we're the only province, by the way, to have an Anti-Racism Act. But that's been what's been determined in Ontario to be the best way to try and categorize or identify what an officer's behavior is based on when it comes to race. So I'm not sure if that answers it, but long story short, yes, there is training, and it comes through the street check regulation.
Any follow-up, Mr. Chabar?
No, thank you. I appreciate that, Deputy Chief Betts. I know that this is not a precise or an exact science, and we're not talking about it in any biological descriptor sense. It's more of a kind of social construct sense and perception. And that's where because it's imperfect, that's why I was looking for the guidance that you provided, which is, yes, there is some training. It's not just left to the officers of their own avail to make that determination. So thank you for that very detailed answer. That does answer my question. Appreciate it. And with that, yeah,
I
I'd
will
be happy to
return
go
the
back.
chair. Yeah, go
Thank
ahead.
you. Thank you. All right. So that being said, I guess one last time, do any members have any further questions of Deputy Chief Betts with regards to the report? All right. Seeing none, could I get a motion that the board receives for informational purposes the 2021 use of force statistics mandatory board report? Can I get a mover? Councillor Helmer, and seconded by Member Branscombe. Oh, I saw your hand up there. Okay. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Moving on in our agenda, that takes us to the Organized Crime Section Adequacy Standards Report. Deputy Chief McIntyre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So before you is our report on organized crime and the embedded joint force teams and cooperations that we have to assist with that. So the background on them is really historical. We have long had partnerships with many other agencies to really combat multi-jurisdictional and organized type crime. They're essential right now. We know that crime does not just land in London, it crosses boundaries, it crosses jurisdictions, all of those things. So that cooperative piece is essential for information sharing, for intelligence, etc. So this report is comprehensive. It really drills into the 12 partnerships that are currently in place, that were in place rather for 2021. It looks at, were those positions funded? Were they not? What was some of the outcomes at a very, very high level of those various task force? And so I laid that out in a manner I'm hoping that you can understand, but I think instead of reading it to you, I'll just kind of leave it there. And my recommendation obviously is that you receive the attached report. But again, I'm more than happy to answer any specific questions you have with the content found within.
Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Members, any questions or comments in relation to the report just provided? Okay, seeing none. May I have a motion that the board receives for informational purposes the 2021 Internal Task Force Adequacy Standards Report? Can I get a mover for that? Member Walker, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Moving on in the agenda, I have, still staying with you, Deputy Chief McIntyre, the Annual Missing Persons Act Statistics Mandatory Board Report. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And it's totally open to you. I think the one you just approved was organized crime. And now I have internal task force up, but that's totally up to you. Which one you'd like me to?
You know what? You're absolutely correct. Why don't we stay in order of agenda there? So why don't we proceed that way? Thank you.
Sounds great. So this is the internal task force report. This again comes to the board as part of policy, part of adequacy standard, and it really spells out our efforts on identifying crime patterns and what we then, the task force, assembled to address that resulting pattern. So you'll see that, when we compare this year over last, we saw a dramatic increase from 12 internal task force or projects that were developed based on crime trends. So from 12 to 20. I would tell you that a large portion of those were very COVID centric. So one, protests as it relates to the pandemic, we saw an increase in those. I believe there were 7 added to our plan just as a result of protests alone. We saw a couple that we've highlighted for you that were very significant and the associated costs. And so, one interesting piece is that, when we look inside, we can identify crime patterns, and we have excellence in crime analysts here, like talented individuals that check this all the time. We can then deploy officers in accordance with that by assembling various task force, but those officers leave their current position in order to form those task force to do that very specific and targeted work. One I can highlight for you that jumps off the page and really is a result of that drastic shift in stats that you see, that variance from 2020 to 2021 resulted from the Crime Gun Task Force. And that project alone was significant. If I go to my sheet here for you, you'll see that on the chart, we see in 2021, we had 47, well, went from 47 criminal charges up to 232. 182 of those criminal charges were of a result of the Crime Gun Task Force. That project was expensive. I put in, out of an abundance of transparency there, I added that in for you because it is not without a cost. It was in 287, roughly $1,000. That ran for 6 weeks. It did not run that long, and look at how quickly we can drive up costs. There were a bulk of those arrests that you see, that 351 arrests in 2021. Again, that same percentage, all of a result of that task force, which is impressive work. It reduces harm in our community. That project was very specific, analyst driven, looking at high harm targets, not who has a gun, but who's most likely to use that firearm. And the results were phenomenal. So there it goes to show you that really, that benefit of evidence-based policing in solving crime and preventing crime, because who knows what would have happened should that not have occurred. Out of there, 17 firearms alone were seized in that short amount of period. So I show you that is really the big driver from the change in 2020 stats to 2021, really attributed to that task force. I put in a homecoming there for you. We bring in other public order units to assist us with that, to keep the community safe, to ensure the safety of the citizens and of course the students. We bring in, and we do have a reciprocal agreement with those other agencies to help them out in their cities when those same events come. But I threw that cost in for you, again, just out of transparency and to highlight that those events are not without a cost, and our people juggle and shift and switch gears to help us out and to keep the community safe. So in short, the report kind of walks you through that. And just my recommendation that you receive the report, but of course I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre, for your report. Members, any questions or comments in relation to the report just provided? Okay, Councillor Cassidy, go ahead.
Thanks. Just a quick comment. What we've always known all along, how expensive that the student homecoming stuff is. It gets reported out every year. The media does the story on it. We talk about it at City Hall, and I would say, yeah, I know other cities go through this, and I know we've heard from the chief that chiefs and deputy chiefs across the province in affected cities, university towns, have been talking and trying to work out some sort of common solution. And I hope we can find that, because I view that as such a drain on dollars that we could be using for something else. That's all. Thanks for this report, though. It's very good.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Any other members? Okay, seeing none, can I get a mover for the following motion: that the board receives for informational purposes the 2021 Internal Task Force's Adequacy Standards Report? Need a mover on that. Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. We're still staying with you, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Now we're at the Annual Missing Persons Act Statistics Mandatory Board Report. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and again through you. So this report comes to you again, adequacy, but it was interesting out of, in 2019, the Missing Persons Act changed, and it said within that act, if police are going to make urgent demands, need to ask for some private information outside of a judicial authorization, then you have to report that to your boards. And so that's really what brings in this report. And it's really, it is an amazing tool, because it is rarely used, I will say, right out of off the bat, but it's impactful. And so last year we had 690 missing person investigations. And out of those investigations, in total, we had 10 of those investigations, of the 690, we made an urgent demand. So when you think about that, and out of those 10, only 12 records were obtained. So what is an urgent demand? So if I am looking for a missing person, I might like to know, when did they last use their health card? What hospital? What city was that in? When did they last use the ATM? What city was that in? What was the time and location? When did they use an Uber? When did they use some type of mobile pick up your fast food, service? When we look at that, and it allows us to, in the moment, at the time, really quickly identify a last known location and place to conduct a search from. These urgent demands are that they are urgent. The person missing is vulnerable. There is an urgency to locate them to prevent harm to that subject. So it is so careful, the scrutiny and the oversight to ensure not only their privacy and those rights are really protected and balanced against that need to locate with some speed the missing person. So now with this report, it shows you those 12. It's provided to the board, of course, to file to the ministry, that attached report. Again, it's in line with other jurisdictions and agencies. It's something hardly used. And I would like to add that even when we ask for a banking information, very rarely do we actually get a hard copy of that report. I don't need to know your banking information. I just need to know where you were when the last time you used your ATM card. So I say that to you because if we were to receive reports, of course, all of those documents would be kept and retained under our normal procedures for document retention and control here at the organization, but rarely do we come into contact with the actual file itself. But anyways, there's my recommendation for you is that you receive this report and of course forward it off to the Solicitor General's office, and any questions I'm happy to take.
Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre, for your report. Members, any questions or comments in relation to the report? All right, seeing none. Can I get a mover for the following motion? That the board receives for informational purposes the annual Missing Persons Act Statistics Mandatory Board Report and forwards it to the Solicitor General's office before June 1st, 2022. Just looking for a mover of that. So Member Walker, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre, for those reports. Deputy Chief Betts, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, this annual report is coming to you to give you an update on the organization's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Plan, and more specifically, the 21 specific actions that we have identified within that plan. So the recruiting unit is tasked, and the diversity unit are tasked really with the responsibility, a shared responsibility of coordinating and tracking the efforts of London Police Service to meet the organizational goals set out in the plan, which links and dovetails with our business plan. The recruiting unit's tasked with attending recruiting events, as well as offering mentorship to potential applicants and current candidates, while the diversity unit officer is involved with community outreach, recruiting, creating partnerships, and identifying and responding to the needs in the community. The diversity officer is also responsible for the coordination of the Youth Academy, the Police Ethnic and Cultural Exchange Peace Program, and the Youth and Policing Initiative, YIPPY, and of course the Louis Correa Awards, which we just had here in February. Many of the efforts of the diversity unit result in applications to the London Police Service, and needless to say, both recruiting and diversity unit work well together. As you will see in the report, that despite the limitations of COVID, we were able to still continue to participate or coordinate 60 events throughout the year, specifically around recruiting. And as you'll know, that 21 plan report, and it has key performance indicators that the status of each is provided to you in the report, but there are three I'd draw your attention to in particular. The second of those is to provide diversity and inclusivity training to all members of LPS. And the reason I bring that is really sort of in part in response to your last question to the use of force. And that's to provide you with an update that London Police Service this past year provided a 90-minute unconscious bias education sessions to all our members, both sworn and civilian, throughout 2021. It was provided by Ramina Morris, the Director of the Anti-Racism and Anti-Oppression Division, now at City of London. While our staff psychologist, Dr. Khan, provided training to all LPS members participating in our in-service training regarding biases related to mental health issues, which may impact their judgment or behaviors with individuals. And then finally, London Police Service's Dr. Kalal prepared and presented a 30-minute unconscious bias training video for all of our senior officers and any member who's going to be involved in the hiring panels and promotional panels here at London Police Service, all critically important. The next, I guess, benchmark I would provide you to is number 9, and that is to promote the London Police Service and the City of London as a place to work, a place to live, and a place to be. And so the update to that is that although we're constantly evolving, we've updated our website, provided a new landing page, not just to advertise the London Police Service, but to market London Police as merely one aspect of life in the Forest City, trying to entice people. And as I provided you earlier, we have had success in luring people away from other organizations to come work in the London Police Service. And finally, number 19, I think is important, and that's to mentor prospective candidates from diverse communities. So a member of our recruiting unit has been having ongoing training and contact with candidates to provide advice and recommendations and direction and assistance in applying to our organization. And in 2021, 88 members of the community became new mentees. 33 were women, 68 were from diverse communities, and 28 from various religious affiliations, and 5 from other sexual orientations in terms of how they had identified themselves. Mentorship involves initial virtual meetings with our recruiting outreach sergeant and continues with short meetings via phone calls, emails, text messages throughout the process. This would, of course, evolve and change once COVID restrictions have lifted in their entirety. We have a number of other benchmarks that we use to monitor our progress, and despite COVID, the diversity in recruiting units combined attended 362 community meetings, 48 cultural events, 46 newcomer orientations, 5 online recruiting sessions. And at the end of last year, we were able to host an open house for our Sikh and Hindu communities at London Police Service prior to the most recent lockdown, in which 80 community members attended. And I know that we have people who will become London Police employees as a result of that. Lastly, through focused recruiting, we have surpassed all the set goals for diverse and gender hiring that were identified in that plan on pages 7 and 8 of the report before you. But despite our continued work and our effort, the work is never done. And at the time the 21 point plan was established, we had a desire to specific framework for specific actions to ensure our ability to progress in this critical area. And we're proud of the work we've been able to do and the progress we've made, and we'll move forward in establishing our next business plan and our work in this area and continue to evolve and ensure that the meetings of our communities, the needs of our communities, are being met. So subject to any questions you may have, that is my report, and I would recommend that the board receive it for its information.
Thank you for that, Deputy Chief Betts. Members, are there any questions flowing from Deputy Chief's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan report that you may have? All right, seeing none, could I get a motion or a mover for the motion that the board receives for informational purposes the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan 2021 update? A mover on that, please. Member Branscombe, and seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. The next matter is the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel update. Normally that's provided by Chair Toth. I'm a member of that panel, so I could provide an update in her absence there. The next meeting for the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel is scheduled for April 4th. Deputy Chief Betts actually just referenced Romina Morris in his report there. Romina will be actually attending at our very next meeting. And just by way of reminder, Romina Morris is the City of London's Anti-Racism and Anti-Oppression Director. And she's going to be meeting with our panel on April 4th to share where their efforts might be aligned between the efforts of the panel and the city. At that very same meeting on April 4th, we'll also be receiving a presentation from Sergeant Ozzy Nethersole and Constable Ziad Zabian, who's the London Police Diversity Officer, related to their presentation they gave to the York Regional Police Service following the attack on the Afzal family on June 6th, 2021. So we have a jam-packed meeting coming up on April 6th. Actually, everyone's quite excited for that. Not that they're not excited for every meeting, but this one in particular, just because of the the topics that we'll be covering. And yeah, that's a report from Anti-Racism Advisory Panel. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them to the best of my ability. No questions. So moving on, the next matter up is the Mental Health and Addictions Advisory Panel monthly update. Member Walker, could I get you to provide an update there? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. As you know, it was with incredible sadness that we advised the board last week about the suicide of one of the co-chairs of the committee. Co-chair, she is 25 years old, Kristen Legault-Donkers, and her family wrote a really powerful obituary where they said that after years of battling her own demons, along with the bureaucracy of our mental health care system, the system that she so passionately fought for failed her. And that is a narrative that we hear far too often. And so that meeting that we did have scheduled last week was canceled to honor this incredible woman. She worked, so many people reached out to contact us and let us know the contribution she had made to their individual lives. So it was canceled because we wanted to allow members of the panel to grieve and to reflect. And so the next meeting is in the process of being rescheduled. And then MHAP will be, settled again. And I think everybody will try very hard to make some decisions around goals that will honor Kristen's life. It's just absolutely tragic, and I'm sorry to report this bad news.
Thank you for that report, Member Walker. I appreciate not just your comments today, but also the email that you sent out to the board when that happened. So, members, does anybody have any questions for Ms. Walker in relation to her report there? Okay. Thank you very much for that, Ms. Walker. I have next Deputy Chief Betts, online reporting and alternative responses to calls for service presentation. I think you and Inspector Berg, but I'll defer to you, Deputy Chief Betts, in terms of the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, my comments are very limited. I'm just happy to present to you Superintendent Berg, who's going to walk you through a PowerPoint presentation. I'm sure he'll share his screen here so that you can follow along with some of the efforts that have been made to increase our service to the community through a essentially alternate means that may be more convenient for some and expedite responses. Superintendent.
Thank you, Deputy Chief, and Chair, through you, I appreciate the opportunity for a few moments of your time. I know it's late in the day, so I'll get through it quickly. Just going to share my screen here if I could. So it's, I know the question comes up quite often when we talk about some of the pressures on the front line around what we're doing as a service to try to be more efficient and effective. So I'm happy to say that we do lots, and I've been very fortunate to work with a strong team of individuals for many years that continually look at improving our operations and finding efficiencies. What I want to talk today about is some of the work that we did starting back in 2018, and I'm going to take you through that. So just give me a second here as I... So back in 2018, under the leadership of Chief Williams and Deputy Chief McIntyre, we really looked at our frontline deployment model, and we had a deployment model that was about 25 years old, and we looked at ways that we can improve that and really modernize that. We at the time, we brought in problem-oriented policing and evidence-based policing, and we did a number of things in that regard, of which I don't want to take the time today to talk about. We've had previous presentations on that, but some of the things we were looking at was tackling some of the issues upstream rather than in a reactive model, and we were looking at output versus outcome. Flowing from that, we realized that our officers were pretty much drawn to responding to calls for service each and every day, and there wasn't a lot of capacity to do things proactively. So we came up with this idea to really enhance our services to the public, and leveraging some of the accommodated officers that were coming back to work. So we started a project just to test that out called the Enhanced Services Unit Pilot. We took a group of accommodated officers, and really our primary goal was to enhance our service delivery to the public on calls for service that were not classified as urgent. So we're looking at property damages with suspects, things where there were no longer any safety concerns, or where the suspects were gone. We knew that people were waiting many hours for a response from the police. So our goal was to make early contact with members of the public and provide choice to them with some options of making it more convenient for them to report. So we looked at victim choice reporting, and our secondary goal was really to build some capacity for some problem-oriented policing initiatives. And central to all of that, we found that it was really important to have clean data. When we look at problem-oriented policing, it's really driven by the data. And in order to do that, we had to make it attractive for people to report things and easy for them to report things so that we could collect the data and make decisions based on that data. So we ran a short project September to December of 2018. We used 7 accommodated officers to do that, and they worked extremely hard. In that time period, they did 717 investigations, 157 follow-ups. They laid 174 criminal charges or process diversions, depending on the situations. We provided some opportunity for a flexible schedule in there, which made it desirable for them and assisted with some of their return to work plans, et cetera. And we really drilled in and looked at the cost savings here. And, just to look at a high level at the average call time, for the calls that we were looking at, it's about 157 minutes for a patrol officer to respond to those particular calls that we were dealing with. And it took about 25 minutes for the officers involved in the pilot to complete those same calls, mostly because they didn't have to drive and they were leveraging the use of phones and email and those sorts of things. In that short period of time, we recognized we could save 866 hours of investigative time over that 3-month period. In addition to that, we found there was a number of groups that were very satisfied with the pilot. We got letters from the John Howard Society, Legendary Security, the LCPO, Corporate Security, who were very happy with the change that we had made and the quick response to the concerns. We had a number of meetings in 2018, but carried on in 2020 and 2021 with a group of individuals in our good city that are involved in loss prevention. We saw an increase in improvements in our online reporting. And much of the feedback that we received was they really appreciated the single point of contact for thefts and property damage and those types of occurrences with our 7 officers that were assigned to the Enhanced Services Unit. And we saw some from the officers themselves that were involved. They really enjoyed the pilot, and they were able to put puzzle pieces together that we didn't see previously, because we had individual officers previously going to individual cases of theft, et cetera. But because we centralized a lot of these property offenses to one group of individuals, they were making connections that we wouldn't see previously. So here's a couple of examples. One person was identified for over 35 incidents of theft, 30 or 72 criminal charges were laid. Another case, we saw one individual in a 1-month period responsible for 54 incidents of theft, 124 criminal charges were laid. And that there was, an estimated around $60,000 of loss to the business in that particular instance. In 2021, we really kept the momentum for that, and we not only enhanced our online reporting, and I'll show you some of the things that we did with that, but we took 8 officers and we decided to really see what 8 dedicated officers could do if we assigned them to the Enhanced Services Unit. Again, looking at accommodated officers. But we wanted to see, one of the problems that we were finding was because of some of the staffing issues that we're having, we couldn't move forward because we wanted to make sure there was consistency with the Enhanced Services Unit and the staffing. And one of the big things we did in 2021 is we implemented one of our first formal customer service feedback surveys. So if you went online to report something, you would get a link to offer you the opportunity to provide some feedback in regards to our service. And we continue with the Clean Data Initiative, and we implemented dashboards for many of our frontline managers. So just to give you a sense, here was what our online reporting looked like previously. As you can see, it needed some updated. It was very wordy and a bit difficult for members of the public to navigate through. We moved it to much more of a picture-based format. It's much clearer to the community, you know, to understand what they want to do when they get to our online reporting and how best to do it. And no surprise, we saw a big spike in the increase of usage. So you'll see the top of the graph is 2018 or 2021, sorry. And the rest of the years flowing back to 2018 are indicated there. So we were very pleased to see that with some of those easy changes, we were able to really increase our online usage. Just as an interesting point, you know, we got a lot of feedback from the customer service feedback surveys that we did. Mostly it was very positive, but there were some information in there around areas of improvement. One of the simple things we did, we weren't finding that people were updating the reports when they had additional information around stolen property, et cetera. They wanted to add to the report. They were calling us to do that. And we had it termed previously as a supplemental report, which was confusing to members of the public. So, you know, one of the things we learned from the feedback surveys was if we just said, update your report, it was a lot easier for people to understand, navigate that. This is a graph. So at the end of the year, at the end of 2021, we took a look at what our 8 project officers that we dedicated through 2021 could do. And so this is a comparison of our patrol sections. We have 4 patrol sections. And at the far right, you'll see the 8 project officers. This is the total calls for service in 2021. Now, you know, there's a lot of nuances to numbers and the data, but at a high level, you know, based on the number of calls for service, you can see the project officers, the 8 project officers took a big chunk of those calls for service. They almost did comparable to one of a full patrol section. But it is, I put caution to that because the calls that the patrol sections are doing are much more complicated, much more time consuming, and they're not maybe as simplistic as some of the property fences and occurrences that the project officers are doing. But it is representative of the volume of work that they can do. This is another graph showing property fences and the shift from patrol sections to the enhanced service unit pilot project that we did. As you can see, they took a lot of the property fences, theft, shoplifters, property damage away from the front line and did it in a much more efficient format. So we've got good momentum from that, and I'll wrap up the presentation with that. Just at a high level, some of the things that we have done into 2021. What are we looking at next steps? Well, we're really exploring through our enhanced service unit pilot project. We focus on victim choice reporting. So really in a nutshell, if somebody didn't want to do the call through the online reporting or didn't want to deal with the police through over the phone, we did provide the option of attending the call if they wanted that. But there's a number of other things that we're looking at into the future: intimate partner violence, hate occurrences, human trafficking, break and enters. These are some of our crime types that we know some people would prefer the option of not having a police officer show up at their door. They would prefer some other options as a way to report it. And it's important to note when we go through online reporting, we provide the same level of service at the end of the day. So we investigate just in the same manner as we would if we had a patrol officer attend your door. We follow up. We look through other images of people to try to make connections, to try to identify suspects that are unknown. So these are things that we are really exploring into 2022. We want to increase our use of virtual interactions with the public. So along that same line, can we use Zoom and other platforms to reach out to people through the use of the internet? Are they more comfortable with that in certain circumstances? Again, something we're exploring into 2022. We're looking at adding additional languages to our online reporting platform. We know with virtual translation apps and certain things like that, there is the ability out there to appeal to our diverse community and add languages to online reporting. We're trying to be more efficient and integrate the online reporting with our records management system. So again, looking at trying to remove some of the touch points that we have to go through when we enter information into our record systems. And at the end of the day, we're trying to increase our diversion of calls for service from the front line. And you know, at a high level, we've moved the pendulum from about 31% in 2018 to 37% in 2021. And although that doesn't seem like a large percentage, it represents almost 9,000 calls for service that we've shifted through to other than a frontline patrol response. So we are, you know, at the end of the day, we really are trying to become more efficient and provide more time to the patrol operations to focus on problem-oriented initiatives and responding to calls for service in a quicker time period. So with that, I'll leave you, Chair. If there's any questions, appreciate the opportunity to answer them.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Berg. Members, are there any questions for Superintendent Berg in relation to the report and presentation you just gave? I see Member Walker. My screen doesn't show all of you guys anymore because it's a share screen. So I think I saw Member Walker. I don't know if anybody else has put their hands up, but Member Walker, why don't you go ahead first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Superintendent Berg. Thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I am happy to see it being expanded, and I'll look forward to the information you come back with respect to male violence against women and trafficking offenses, particularly given the safety concerns involved and the large percentage of women in those cases that often will change their mind and then re-enter and exit and re-enter. It's a more complex maybe than property matters, but I really look forward to the information. And I just wondered a question which maybe you don't have an answer to, but you said there were 72 charges against one individual and 54 charges against another and $60,000 loss. And I'm wondering, have those cases made their way through the courts yet?
Chair, through you, if I could answer that. So the first point, it's very exciting times with the enhancement to violence against women and those types of reporting. We know that we will see through studies that have done across the world that you know, when there's more options available to people, they're more apt to report things where they feel more comfortable, depending on the nature. So it's very exciting times, and we have a team of great individuals that are working on that very initiative. As it relates to those charges, we are working with the Crown on a number of different initiatives to handle those types of chronic offenders. One of the big and very exciting things right now is the Community Justice Center pilot in our city, and we're seeing great success from that. There's no value in laying a huge number of charges, and in cases like that, typically we see a lot of effort done by the police, resulting in one very seldom number of convictions, because it doesn't really make a huge difference when it comes to whether there's the sentencing provisions are quite varied for the judges already. So we are continually working with the Crown to be more efficient in how we manage charges against somebody where there's multiple charges laid, and we continue to work on that. So in those two cases, they have both been resolved through the courts, and we didn't see convictions on those on that number of charges. But the courts are always looking at other diversionary measures and really looking at attacking some of the core issues that cause those offenses to occur in the first place. And the Community Justice Center is a great example of that change in philosophy.
Mr. Chair, may I just ask one other question of the superintendent?
Absolutely.
So first of all, a comment, which is, yes, I totally agree. It's exciting. And I think one of the best things we can provide to all individuals is a menu of options for them to choose from around what's best for them. So I'm really excited about that. So you said that I'm just trying to feed this out a little bit because you've done all of this amazing work resulting in two cases, multiple charges, which I know often don't stick. But when you said that it didn't, neither case resulted in conviction, I'm wondering, when you talk about diversion programs, where would they divert somebody to with so many multiple offenses around property theft?
Chair, through you, great question. And it's really, there's individual unique circumstances. So there's a number of options that are available through the many great community groups that we have in our city, whether it's homelessness, whether it's addiction, whether it's mental health. These are some of the upstream causes of these criminal offenses that we are seeing. And what I'm seeing is with the pilot that not to get into too much detail, but with the pilot that we're currently running in London around the Community Justice Center, the work is fantastic in that they're getting into the core problem that's causing some of these criminal offenses to occur, and that takes time. And right now, what I'm seeing is, between the justice partners, defense counsel, Crowns, the judge themselves, in the case of the Justice Center, Youth Opportunities Unlimited, they are really getting into the core issue, which is causing some of these criminal offenses with great results. So that's the early feedback that we're seeing. But it's to answer your question, and I hope I did. It's really individualized depending on the circumstance, but and we are seeing some reoccurring themes.
Well, I appreciate your great work, and of course, it's always a balance to find something in sentencing or through the courts that actually recognizes the harm caused and also balances that out with the background of some individuals. And I think it must be frustrating sometimes for police officers to do so much work to lay charges and then get to the justice system and have those charges withdrawn. But that's for another day. I just feel very, I'm really inspired by what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Walker, for those questions and comments. Members, any further questions or comments for Superintendent Berg in relation to his presentation? Okay, seeing none. Can I get a mover for the motion that the board receives for informational purposes the presentation titled Online Reporting and Alternate Responses to Calls for Service? Can I get a mover of that? Oh, sorry. I see Deputy Chief Betts' hand pop up. I'm going to imagine you're not moving anything there, but I'm going to recognize you there. Thanks, Deputy Chief.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, definitely not looking to move, although I certainly would if you would extend that to me. I just wanted to thank Superintendent Berg and really the folks in our Enhanced Services Unit. And really what I'd like to do is draw this all the way back to some of the conversations we've been having over the last couple of months about what is LPS doing to sort of reduce the unnecessary types of calls that we're going to, or the lower risk calls that are preventing us from getting to some of those higher priority calls in a more timely fashion. And this is a great example of that type of work, hence the enhanced piece, because it is really providing an enhanced reporting service to those who are looking for alternate means of reporting, but it is freeing up officers from those calls. And much to Member Walker's point about 60 charges or types of thefts, that's 60 calls that officers aren't responding to that we can get to be dealt with through technology and through other alternate means. So that does free up our officers. It's a constant evolution of what we're trying to do to enhance our overall service delivery with the staff and the people that we have, and to drive that efficiency. So thank you very much to Superintendent Berg. And I just wanted to make sure that was really hammered home, is these folks are providing a tremendous service, not just to the organization and the people they work with, but quite frankly to the city. Thank you very much for that opportunity, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. Could not agree with you more if I tried. So I appreciate that there. The motion, forgive me, I didn't see if anybody had put their hand to move forward that motion. So Member Walker moving. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Helmer. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. there's no new business. And so as we just before we wrap up quite literally the last item here, I just wanted to kind of in line with Deputy Chief Bett's comments, just to say thank you to to the members of the administration for the quality and detail of the reports today, and for the answers that were provided, and to Ms. Foster for all the work that you do behind the scenes in getting these meetings up to speed and organized. I have a better appreciation for that today than I may have had in previous meetings. And also to the members of the board for your questions and comment, and to the participants and everybody else watching, that just thank you for everything there. And thank you for your indulgence as I chaired my very first meeting here. So I appreciate everybody's indulgence there. With that, the next London Police Services Board public meeting is on Thursday, April 21st, 2022. There will be finance committee will be meeting in the morning, and then the schedule will be released by Jennifer closer to that date, but the date, you can circle it on your calendars, April 21st, 2022. And with that, the easiest motion of the day, can I get a motion for an adjournment? I saw Councillor Helmer's hand. I thought, go up there, seconded by Member Walker. I imagine no one's opposed. All right, that's carried. Thank you, everybody. See you on the 21st, if not before. Have a good one.